Hello and welcome back to this afternoon's sessions of the Exhibition Marketeers Masterclass. My name is Katie Moorhen. I am founder and director of 5283. If you're just joining us, hello and welcome. And if you've missed any of the sessions from this morning or can't make all the sessions for the afternoon, we are recording all the sessions and they will be available later next week. This afternoon's sessions are going to take a slightly different format from the presentations this morning. We've got a number of panel discussions, presentations and conversations with. So I feel like you're going to have a great afternoon. Thank you again to our sponsors, Tag Digital, First Sight Media and the Business Design Centre. We've just seen some of their adverts again ahead of this session. That was an idea that somebody came up with that really provided value for our sponsors, but also is a really good way to introduce a session. This afternoon's session's kicking off with us changing the sales conversation panel discussion. We've got some amazing salespeople from the events industry, all experienced, all know what they're talking about, and are, again, inspirational people that I pick up the phone to whenever I've got questions. So I'm going to hand over to Matt Coyne from Waves Connects, who's moderating this afternoon's session. Over to you, Matt.
Thank you very much, Katie. For those of you that don't know me, I've started a new venture recently, the Waves Connects podcast, which is obviously free to listen to, but just to help people in our industry when they're looking at what's next. And to my left, I have Debbie Lee, co-founder and director of Benchmark Collective. And then virtually today, which is quite exciting because it's my first in-person event in months, but we also then have a talking head screen with Chloe Richardson, the founder of Acier events as well. So welcome to you both. Thank you for joining us today. So the session is about changing the sales conversation, and to give you a little bit of a background, I mean, Katie said inspirational and amazing and some other lovely words about us. Hopefully that all rings true. But I think really we put together this trio because I think all of us have sales experience, we all have a little bit of marketing experience, and really this session is about how we bring together sales and marketing to work better towards, I think, a more common goal. And with the ever-changing landscape of the events industry, marketing plays an even more pivotal, not pivot, but pivotal role in influencing sales for the future. So I think we're going to maybe kick off with Debbie, because you're next to me. Sales and marketing, what does that mean to you as sort of two words together, as it were?
Well, yeah, we can combine them into smarketing.
Marketing.
Like that. For me, in our industry particularly, they can be quite siloed activities, but I personally have seen the most effective results when they're combined and when those two operating functions within an events organisation have united goals and that they're working together towards those goals. So to me, they are one in the same thing. This conversation is about how we can kind of bring that around in this new world that we're in.
Super. And Chloe, what's your take on, I was going to say S&M, but I do mean sales and marketing.
Hi, Matt. Hi, Debbie. Lovely to see you. Similar to Debbie, really, I suppose they're codependent on each other. And in order for one to be successful, the other also has to work. So I suppose two cogs of the same wheel. And like Debbie said, today we're going to be talking about how really they should be working together and how we can make sure that we do. But yeah, similar opinion. I think they are one in the same.
Thanks, Chloe. And so, I mean, understanding sales then, and Debbie, you just mentioned it, the siloed kind of approach, very much two separate departments is something that we talked about before. But you've done a little bit more research into that to sort of see not just our industry, but, worldwide. I think you sort of looked at what the silo is.
Yeah, there's some interesting research. LinkedIn have done some interesting research actually recently that said that of those sales and marketing professionals that were surveyed, over 90% identified disconnects, either culturally or in terms of their kind of goals or what they were working towards. So, it's not, I think that disconnect exists outside of our world. Obviously, our experience is within this events world, and I certainly have seen that where the sales team are off busy finding companies to exhibit, and the marketing team are off busy finding people to attend the event. Without always necessarily there being a joined up approach as to who those individuals are and who those businesses are.
And so, so Chloe, what's, you work across, I think, a number of events, a number of organisers. Like, what is maybe a common approach of how we could start to bring that conversation together so that people are starting to align with each other? What are some practices you've sort of seen maybe from some of the clients you've been working with?
Yeah, really good question. I think it needs to really come from the top down. So it's absolutely key for any C-suite, any MD, any director of any business to sit down with all of their managerial team and say, look, this is a problem we need to sort out. It's absolutely imperative that we're all singing from the same hymn sheet and that we're making sure that we market ourselves in the right way as both salespeople and marketeers. So it's actually about putting processes in place to support that long-term goal, whereby all marketeers and all salespeople are part of the same value chain. So how can we go about making sure that we emphasize that? So it's working interdepartmentally. We know that. It's about having regular meetings. It's about actually maybe having different DACHI systems where people have to report to other people outside of their typical department so they can see how they work. I've seen a couple of exhibition organizers who do shadowing days. So they'll have somebody from the sales team shadowing somebody from the marketing team to actually understand how their role works and where the struggles and difficulties may be, so they can be slightly more empathetic when requesting something in the future, and they understand how each other's jobs work. I suppose that's the fundamental thing about the shadowing piece. So both really good ideas, but I think it needs to come from top down. It needs to be embedded into the philosophy and the values of a company in order for it to really come to fruition.
So maybe that's something that we could ask just before. I think Debbie wanted to say something there, but just before we dive into that, maybe for those that are watching, listening, if you could add into the comments if any of your companies are doing, I'd say, regular meetings, and I don't mean a kind of quarterly like marketing presents, then sales presents, and then you go on your merry way again, but any form of weekly sort of sessions. So if anyone would like to add that into the comments whilst we're talking, we'd love to bring that up. But Debbie, you wanted to add something?
It was just really to build on what the point Chloe made, like a practical approach is to have that workshop with your sales team and your marketing team together to build those buyer personas that we talk about in the sales world a lot, but actually to build those for those companies you're trying to bring in to your event, and then obviously build them for their buyers, which is one of the conversations your sales team hopefully should be having anyway when they're selling to these businesses, to understand who their ideal client is. And clearly they are also the ideal person that the marketing team should be marketing to. So it's working together to build those from the outset, and then everything else comes from that.
Well, so it's interesting. An old colleague of mine, Christine Martin, a marketing director at our last place, she would bang the drum about these personas daily.
Yeah.
I had a vested interest in it, and perhaps that's with marketing experience too. I was thinking about it more, but I think what you'd notice is, there was some great work that they did in kind of building out these decks and these PDFs and some in-person kind of almost descriptions of exactly what these people are. I mean, we even at one point had some lovely cardboard cutouts with exactly what these different people looked like, and there was some great handshakes. Was
the joys of a graphics department.
Yeah, exactly. But the importance of the follow-up from that, I think, maybe Chloe, if you could touch on this, but not just presenting what the persona is, but helping each other understand. I mean, Chloe, I think you mentioned on our pre-call about the salesperson actually telling marketing, this is the type of customer I'm talking to, and seeing if they're aligned.
Yeah, I think it's really key to remember that there are, especially in the events and trade show industry, there are two key customers. There's your customers and the end user customer, who is your customer's customer, right? So you've got the exhibitors and the people they want to exhibit to, who are the audience who your marketing team would generally communicate with. And I think if the marketing team can understand, first of all, the exhibitor community and the sponsor community, it can help them when they're sourcing attendees, so they know who the exhibitors and sponsors actually want to have in front of them. That's a key point, and something that as salespeople we see on site a lot, that's maybe been lost in translation. But also it works on the reverse too. It's mutually beneficial, because if the salespeople are talking to the marketing department and saying these are the types of exhibitors we have, then the marketing department can use that to promote to their audience as well. So I guess it's both people really understanding their audience, which are the visitors and sponsors and exhibitors, telling each other who they are, so that in every communication, whether it's on a public forum as a marketeer or whether it's a sales conversation, you're making sure you're using that data and that understanding to say, look, we do have your customer here. I can give you example X, Y, Z. Therefore, this is the right place for you. So if the communication between marketing and sales is done properly, particularly with targeting customers, then actually it's a win-win for everybody, and you're going to end the show and everyone's going to be happy because they've seen the people they came to see. Debbie will probably agree with me. So often we're on site and we'll be told, oh, but we didn't see the people that we expected to see. And then it's, why didn't they? Who should they have told? How can the sales and marketing team work together to make sure that this is delivered? And it's really easy in theory. It's just doing it in practice, I suppose.
So is it more about, maybe Debbie answers this one, but more about having a common goal together? Like how often, I mean, there's a common goal of, there's a bottom line that we need to increase. But is there a common goal of who you need to speak to, or the type of customer that you need to attract when you're going out and talking to some of these sort of prospects and so on?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, as Chloe said, it's your customer. Exhibitors fund our events, don't they? So they're often seen as the buyer, but obviously it's their buyers ultimately that you've got to attract to the event. And if your sales team understand who their buyers are, then you're going to have a successful event, whether that's a real live event or whether that's a hybrid, dare I say, event or a virtual event. That is the actual connecting piece. That's the exchange that needs to happen. So I think also, to Chloe's point, it works both ways. Sales teams, the leads that they get from a marketing department are usually the best leads they get. There was some research I talked to you about, Matt, about that actually they are, excellent or good leads rated by most top salespeople. So it's mutually beneficial. And one of the things we talked about is, actually recognising that in your planning for those teams, for your incentives for those teams as well.
Yeah, and KPIs is absolutely something that we're going to touch on the end, but we might save that for the end part, because that could be the bit that maybe rocks some teams, I think, a little bit, or
crescendo Matt at the end.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully, gives some marketers some ideas to sort of go back to their teams and businesses with. But we mentioned about relationships and. But there's two words that Debbie didn't want to use, which was hybrid and pivot, and I'm pleased.
You're going to use them both in one sentence.
Well, I'm also going to throw in customer journeys.
Okay.
It's maybe a word I've overused in my time. But when you're looking at that customer journey, like who owns the relationship? Is it sales? Is it marketing? In the traditional, events of 2019, for example, once it's sold, does that go to operations, to form fill? But maybe like today, who owns that relationship in an organization? Chloe?
I think it's an element of everybody has to own that relationship, because it's the only way that it's going to be delivered successfully. And remember, and especially now, we are focusing on long-term, fruitful relationships that support our customer. We're being very customer-centric. And in order to be customer-centric, you need to make their journey as smooth as you possibly can be by making sure that every single component of people they interact with within a business are linked, are cohesive, are coherent, and are working together to their end goal of providing that customer with a successful result at the event, whether, as you said, virtual, hybrid, or physical. And so, yeah, I think everyone has a responsibility to deliver that. You can't just sort of sign somebody up on a contract and say, right, ops, over to you guys, because actually the sales conversations you've had, you've got to know that customer, you know how they work, you know how they judge success, and so you want to support the rest of your team. So together you can make sure you deliver that success and that results-driven campaign, whatever the driver might be for that. And so, yes, I think it's part of everybody's role to look after the customer after they've been onboarded.
Well, and how then, maybe this for Debbie, but how have you seen the change of the relationship with the switch to sort of digital and hybrid this year? Is it, you could argue that marketing is driving more of the conversation because it's digital, because maybe you're not conversing physically with everyone all the time. Or is it sales from your side that's maybe got the longer relationship, so that the marketing's supporting that part? Have you seen a sort of switch in that side of things?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that everyone's roles are up in the air, aren't they? And everyone's learning a new element, a new kind of skill set. So content is a key focus. Sales team, I'm certainly from my experience, they are much more central post-sale at the moment, because it's actually a much more complex sale, generally speaking, in the virtual world. There's a lot more touch points, there's a lot more interaction going on after the sale, because there are round tables and there's pre-campaigns and all sorts of things. It's because we're not focusing on that kind of 3 live days or 2 live days. So I think the responsibility is everyone's, and I think in many cases that I've seen, they're taking it. So they've come much closer, actually, the sales and marketing teams in some event organising companies over the last 6 months.
Yeah, okay. Well, so maybe you mentioned about sort of the stats side of thing, and that's something for me. I've banged the drum quite heavily about analytics and insight and the value that can give to exhibitions where we don't necessarily compete in the digital stage, but I think now we can. So maybe it's marketeers that understand more of the stats available and in a presentable way. So when you guys have been out doing either rebooking or the sales side of thing, what stats are you looking at, or are sort of exhibitors and sponsors being or asking you for to sort of say, okay, prove it to me?
Well, there's some reticence at sharing stats, certainly, and Chloe will agree with him, I'm sure. When you're on the exhibition floor and you're speaking to exhibitors, you're very limited traditionally in what you can share. I'm hopeful that because there's a lot more data and analytics out there for virtual events, that they will be shared across the board, and they should be in this conversation between sales and marketing both ways. So the stats relating to the audience that are attending, what people are visiting, it's so much more rich now, the data that we're getting. But that needs to be in the sales team's hands so that they can actually prove ROI to their exhibitors.
Well, do you think, Chloe, that's because from years gone by, it's, 5,000 people came to this show, it's great, hurrah, we've had a success. Every exhibitor has a different requirement. Some just want to see one customer that will make something big. But is it because maybe these numbers are actually a real interpretation of what's going on, that it is only 39 people that come by your stand, but actually they're good value? Have you seen a sort of change in those kind of conversations from just the big fat number?
Yeah, good question, Matt. I think it definitely traditionally has been a focus on, let's look holistically at the big number and throw that at our sales clients, at our exhibitors. And now that we've moved into this more data-focused, digital, insight-driven world, I think what we're able to do is actually sort of filter it out a bit and realize it's actually not the volume of people that walk through the door isn't really what's of interest to each individual customer and to each individual exhibitor. The interesting thing is how many engage with you, how many are interested in your content, and how many are your prospect buyers. And what we've seen over the last 7 months is actually we can present that information, and it's about quality of audience rather than just quantity. So we now, I think, have learnt that we can actually say to somebody, look, you had 40 leads today, warm leads of your target audience. Whereas before, I think a lot of salespeople maybe shied away from that, thinking, oh, but the number 40 doesn't look impressive. They're not going to be chuffed with that. They're not going to want to rebook. They're not going to want to come back. But it's actually, how can you translate those 40 people in business terms to ROI? And now that we have that data that's more accessible, and over the last 7 months, we've learned to work with it better across teams to deliver better reports for our customers, I think that this means that we've got more long-term and more fruitful relationships going forward with all of our customers, which I think is a really positive thing that we've learned from the last 7 months.
Yeah, and I think that's what I know Explorer have touched on, some of the surveys for years that are the NPS score is worse than banks, I think. And perhaps it is because of some of that number sharing, obviously amongst other reasons, but if we could be more open, honest and transparent about those numbers, people will trust you when you try and sell it to them next time, I think. And there's an interesting analogy someone shared on a webinar I was doing maybe a few weeks ago now, but content is king for marketeers. It has been for a very long time, but the quality is queen, and I quite liked that because it's kind of actually without the quality of content, you then don't have the sort of the follow-up to deliver afterwards. So I think it seems perfectly relevant. Maybe final question is to talk about KPIs and maybe how we target teams together. I know there's some stats that we know of one organizer, so we'll save that for a minute just in case. But are you seeing sort of any shared maybe KPIs or shared incentives between sales and marketing teams that you've been working with?
Yes. So to truly get your team working together with the customer at the heart of it, you need to really focus them in, and the best way to do that is, yes, of course, to get them together, to share your goals, to talk about all the things we've said, buyer personas, but also from an incentive perspective to actually, incentivize your marketing team with a proportion of the sales and vice versa, so that they are really targeted to work together and to meet your goals that your business is wanting to meet.
And how about you, Chloe? On the same sort of question.
So with regards to your question, Matt, about whether I've seen it actually happen in practice, I haven't. I know we're going to talk about an example in a second, but I don't see it happening enough, and it needs to happen more, because I work with a lot of brilliant sales teams, and they do rely heavily on not only the intel of their marketeers, but also the resources and the hard work and the output of their marketeers. And it leads me to the question, why isn't this already integral as part of our events sales business model, that the marketeers share a proportion of the success? Because they should. They are part of the value chain. They add value to every single service that we as event organisers offer. So it's only natural that they should be a part of the reward system as well. And I think if we were to see that, of course, you'd have a few salespeople at the start might perhaps shy away from that, thinking, what's the benefit for me? But actually realising having the whole team on board and everybody benefiting is such a positive way of doing business. And I think the more we do that, the more honest and insightful conversations we can have with our clients, and the more success for our events in general. So I think it's a definitely positive move that we need to start implementing with all of our teams.
And that's, the one example, we're not going to name any names because that would be unfair, but there was a clear 10% sort of attribution of the sale went back to marketing, from sales. So they're effectively taking 10% from the sales team, but in theory that incentivizes the marketer to work more closely with the salespeople and vice versa, because they realize actually there's a direct benefit to my wallet of us working together. So I think it'd be interesting. I think there's a few questions which we will come on to in a second.
It's incredibly rare, though. It is rare in events businesses at the moment for that to happen.
So maybe for the more senior marketers that are listening on at the minute that can affect that change, it'd be really interesting to see, if you could do it on some events, pick a couple of sectors if you have multiple and try it and let us know what works, I think. So maybe before we dive onto those questions, if we could each give maybe one takeaway. Mine very much about the sales and marketing teams working more closely together. Most businesses I've worked in the past, you typically have sales and marketing was the sort of almost top job title, so that whoever was in charge had them both with them. So you're almost forcing them to work together and sort of building that correct persona, I guess, to deliver better results. So Chloe, how about you? What's one of your key takeaways from the session for people?
So I think the key takeaway I would like to stress is that marketeers, you are salespeople, and salespeople, you are marketeers. Don't ever think that you're not one or the other, because you are, and it's just a case of actually harnessing your skills and being one or the other, but doing them both excellently. So it's about not shying away, not being afraid to say, I am a salesperson, I market an event, I'm a brilliant salesperson, because you are.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you, Chloe. Debbie?
Mine would be to make sure that you don't stop that concerted sales and marketing joint effort at the point of sale. You need to continue to market to your exhibitors. You need to continue to look after them, and that's everyone's responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Debbie. So we do have a couple of questions. One, Nolan O'Connor, thank you for joining in. He made the unpopular decision of splitting up his marketing team. It's just disappeared. Marketing team to make them sit alongside the sales team for their respective events. Marketeers soon valued it. I'd love to know more, Nolan, of why they maybe didn't value it or what the problems were. Feel free to comment again, because we'd love to pick up on that if we can. Then we've got Sam North. Thank you for joining us. An approach I advocate is pairing sales and marketing staff to run exhibitor prom plans for specific sectors, then publicize the number of leads generated across the team. So I guess that's sort of showing the team coming together and actually what they're delivering together as one. So I think that's a really good example. Thank you, Sam. Claudia Bolters, I hope I've said your name correctly. This is a question for Chloe. Thank you for your interesting insights. Well done, Chloe.
You're welcome, Claudia.
My question to you is, how important are languages for a successful exhibition sales strategist?
Ooh, interesting question. I think actually this links in very well with marketing, because I've always thought that languages equal communication equals marketing equals a good salesperson. So actually having the ability to communicate something you're trying to market in a variety of languages not only obviously helps you because you can market to a wider pool of people, but also helps because you learn about different ways to communicate things effectively, even in your own language. So when you have the ability to speak multiple languages, I think that makes you a better communicator and therefore a better marketeer and salesperson. I hope that answers the question.
I mean, I hope so. I guess that's where my sort of American English has maybe helped me so much in the past with my multi-languages. But yeah, thank you, Chloe. I think that's answered that. I'm just checking. I don't think we have any more live questions. Katie, did you have any more come through from your side?
Yes, I have quite a few questions. I've managed both a sales and a marketing team, and it's very different personality types, I suppose. And I think that's perhaps where, with sales teams, it's always about motivating every day, and with marketing teams often they sort of get away, sitting around and sitting in the corner and being quite administrative and quiet. Do you think how is that dynamic changing or impacting now everybody's working from home? Do you see motivating sales teams from home as managers and that interaction, that relationship building, is it harder? How do you see that working?
I think it's definitely different because you're not physically there. You're not got any ringing bells or targets shouting or boards up. So everyone's had to adapt to that. So there's a lot more communication, I think, via daily meetings and things. I think to your point about the different cultures in sales and marketing, that's really interesting, which is why I think some of the comments that have been made about pairing them up really work. But I really think you have to go that extra mile and actually incentivise them in the same way, because it would be interesting, wouldn't it, whether we're virtual or otherwise, to incentivise marketeers in the same way you do sales teams, and then see how those personas work together. Because I think admin can be seen as a kind of marketing can come under that label, can't it? Which is wrong, because everything we've said today, they are as influential in bringing in the audience as the sales team are. So, yeah, I think it has to happen. You have to go the whole hog, Katie. It's what I'm advocating today.
Well, I think I've used this example in the past. I don't know if anyone's been to the Zappos sort of online shoe reseller in the US. Really interesting story, so do Google it if you haven't, or read the book, or listen to a podcast, or so many other ways of getting in touch with them. But we went to their effectively customer service warehouse, and it's really about returning shoes and sending out the right shoes. It couldn't be more simple. But their key values were plastered everywhere. And per that point of, the sales team ringing the bell, like they'd be ringing bells if they got good satisfaction, or if someone just spoke to someone and they learnt the person's real name, for example. So the excitement going round, effectively a glorified call center, was amazing to witness, which is something you would normally just sort of see in a sales team with a bell, at the end of the wall or something like that. So I think it kind of comes back to then the core values of the business instilled in every department, not just sales.
Can I add something to that question, Katie? Just in terms of the different sort of stereotypical personality traits that both salespeople and marketeers possess. I've worked with quite a lot of sales teams and marketing teams over the last 7 months. And one of the biggest learns for me over this period has been that so many marketeers and salespeople had such similar feedback that they were finding that their personalities were adapting and shifting, and they were finding skills they didn't realize they had, which brought them more in the middle. So marketeers who may have before deemed themselves as a bit quiet, like to do administrative jobs, that kind of thing, and salespeople who were very kind of peacocky and flamboyant, found that working on their own taught them how to be more like the marketeers, or working on their own taught the marketeers how to be more communicative with their sales teams. And actually they kind of met in the middle in a really nice place, which I found lockdown has really supported, because it's made you adapt. And a lot of people have found parts of their personality they didn't realize they had before, because they never had the chance to exhibit those traits in the working environment. And working alone has meant that they were able to have those personality traits brought out in them and exhibit them. And I think that's a really nice thing. And it seems to be like the marketeers and salespeople have met in so many ways in the middle because of the way they've changed working.
Well, so Nolan did respond back. Thank you for doing that, Nolan. Good to see you're still listening or watching. But you said it was splitting a close-knit marketing team who sat together and joining what they perceived to be a very different type of job in sales, who were loud and constant. So I think that's perfectly relevant to what you said then, Chloe, as well.
I have another question about all of you sold on digital products, right? So all of you have sold virtual or digital products. And for some of our sales teams, this is the first time that they're not selling physical space, and they're having to adapt the way they sell and adapt their approach. What are the key objectives that you've seen in the past, and how for selling virtual and digital experiences or events, and how are you overcoming those objections? How are you handling them?
It's really interesting. I think for me, it's maybe a conversation we've been having for quite a few years, and it's understanding the value of them. For the traditional sort of trade show sales sponsorship type person, they would get a really good commission off of selling a high value space. the digital product was often cheaper and therefore then lower commission. So what are they going to talk to their customers about? Not this thing that they can get £10 on, but this thing that they can get £100 on. It's quite black and white, in my opinion. So I think there's two sides. One, you need to see if you can change that ratio, and actually, if you're selling bundles or whatever, that's another topic maybe. But it's understanding the value that sort of digital bit brings to them as a salesperson. If I sell this bit, I'm going to understand more about how my customer interacts here, here, and here, which means I can sell better to them the next time round or to other future prospect customers. So I think it's educating the importance of the sort of insight and analytics that can come around it, for sure.
I also think it depends what kind of salesperson you were before. So if you were someone that was always focused on the customer and their needs and understanding them before you tried to sell them something, and that's not always the case with a commodity like square meters. You know, we tend to sometimes just try to sell them the space. I think if you were focused on your customer and understanding them, then actually the virtual sale is not that different, because it's still about content, it's still about the audience, it's still about their participation and understanding it. But I do think the timeline for that sale is extended in the virtual world, because you have to nurture them through everything else, the matchmaking, the networking virtually, you know, whereas before it was very much just let them kind of get on with it, hand them over to the ops team, and hope for the best. So I think that kind of would be my response to that.
I've got another question. I know we're sort of coming close to time, but another question that's coming online that I think is quite an interesting one to discuss anyway. It's from Joe Atkinson. Hi, Joe. As an exhibitor, I don't really care how many visitors or how much business was done last year. I only care how many visitors are potentially interested in our product. I think for those of us know that's where a lot of that information will come from marketing. So perhaps it's more marketing constantly updating, or is it creating the right dashboards? I know there's some intelligent platforms out there. What's your experience maybe of kind of those specific almost exhibitor? It's not an objection, it's a question. I'll go with Chloe on that one.
Yeah, thanks, Joe, for that. It's a really good point. And I think that kind of just brings in together everything we've been talking about today, where it's a case of it's not about volume, it's not about holistic, it's about teams working together to be able to deliver that information to an exhibitor to say, this is how many people visited your stand and this is how many are interested. But it's also about the exhibitor talking to the salespeople and saying, this is the type of person I want to see. These are my target customers. These are my prospects. Can you help deliver them to me, whether on a virtual platform or a physical platform? And I think it's, again, a two-way conversation that the sales team would then obviously talk to marketing about it and make sure that these right end user customers are being brought in for the exhibitors and sponsors. And it's like you say, Joe, you don't care if there's been 4,000 people at the event if only 3 of them have wanted to buy your product. So it's about using the tools that we now have. And Matt makes a good point. There are some brilliant dashboards out there which people can now use to deliver that information in terms of specifics. Who is here to buy what you're selling and how can you talk to them?
Fantastic. Thank you, Chloe. I think we're nearing on end of our allocated time.
Literally to the second.
To the second.
Well done, Matt.
Fantastic. Amazing. It's bringing such a good panel together, I've got to be honest.
Thank you, Chloe, Debbie and Matt. Thank you very much for coming.
Hi, I'm Laura, one of the founders at Tag Digital. Tag Digital is a PPC agency for event organisers. Our remit is to deliver visitor registrations, exhibitor leads, delegates, awards and new data for event organisers. We work in campaigns all over the world for organisers like Informa, Messe Frankfurt, Dubai World Trade Centre, Essential, ITE and lots more.